"Do not look at me, because if you discover who I really am, I will lose the only life I have left." The words escaped Emma Whitmore's lips as she stood beneath the cold moonlight, hiding at the edge of Silverpine Forest with nothing but a small bag and the hope of starting over. For years, Emma had learned one painful lesson. Sometimes the safest place for an Omega was the place where no one could find her. Silvercrest Kingdom was known for its powerful alphas, ancient traditions, and a society where many believed an Omega's worth was decided before she ever had the chance to prove herself. Emma had never wanted power. She had never dreamed of palaces or royal titles. She only wanted a quiet life, where she could help others without being judged by a name she never chose. But after years of hiding who she was, even a quiet life had become difficult to protect. Emma lived in a small village far from the royal capital, spending her days gathering herbs, preparing remedies, and caring for those who needed her help. The villagers knew her as a kind young woman with a gentle heart, but few knew the fear she carried inside. She had seen how quickly people changed when they discovered someone was an Omega. She had watched others lose respect, opportunities, and freedom because of assumptions made before anyone knew their true character. So Emma made a choice. She would stay unnoticed. She would keep her distance from powerful alphas. She would never give anyone a reason to look closer. But destiny rarely followed the plans people made for themselves. On the same night, Emma entered the forest searching for rare healing plants. The royal carriage of Silvercrest passed through the nearby road. Inside was Alexander Vale, the Alpha King who ruled the kingdom with calm authority. At 35 years old, Alexander was respected by thousands and trusted with countless responsibilities. Many believed he had everything a person could want: a crown, a kingdom, endless influence. But behind the title was a man who had spent years carrying every decision alone. Alexander had learned to read people quickly. He knew when someone approached him for personal gain. He knew when words were carefully chosen to impress him. Yet he had never met someone who tried so desperately not to be noticed. When Alexander saw Emma standing near the forest path, he noticed something unusual. She did not move like someone seeking attention. She moved like someone hoping the world would pass her by. There was no ambition in her eyes, no attempt to gain favor, only a quiet determination to survive. For a moment, the Alpha King forgot about the endless responsibilities waiting for him. He saw a person who seemed to be carrying a hidden story. Emma felt his presence and immediately lowered her gaze, afraid that one moment of attention could reveal everything she had spent years protecting. She turned away, hoping she could disappear before anyone asked questions. But Alexander had already noticed her. And for the first time in many years, the Alpha King found himself wanting to understand someone who wanted nothing from him. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single encounter at the edge of the forest would begin a journey that would change the future of Silvercrest Kingdom forever. The morning after their unexpected meeting in Silverpine Forest, Emma Whitmore returned to her village before anyone could ask where she had been. She carried the same basket of herbs, walked the same familiar paths, and greeted the same neighbors with a gentle smile. To everyone around her, it seemed like an ordinary day. But inside, Emma could not forget the moment when the Alpha King's eyes found her. For years, she had practiced becoming invisible. She had learned how to lower her gaze, how to avoid crowded places, and how to keep her true identity hidden from those who might judge her. Yet somehow, standing before Alexander Vale, she felt as though he had seen the person behind all the fear she carried. That thought frightened her more than anything else. Meanwhile, inside Silvercrest Palace, Alexander found himself thinking about the mysterious young woman from the forest. He had met countless people throughout his years as King Alpha. Nobles approached him with carefully prepared words. Leaders came with requests and promises. Many wanted his attention because of what his position represented. But Emma had been different. She had looked at him like a person, not a crown. She had not tried to impress him. In fact, she had done everything possible to avoid being noticed. That was what stayed in his mind. During a royal meeting that afternoon, Alexander listened as advisors discussed matters concerning the outer villages. Reports mentioned a healer from a small settlement who had helped many families during difficult seasons. The name caught his attention: Emma Whitmore. He remembered the quiet woman in the forest and wondered how someone with such a caring nature had learned to hide from the world. Later that day, Alexander requested information about the village. He did not want to invade Emma's privacy. He simply wanted to understand the person who had unexpectedly captured his curiosity. The reports revealed nothing unusual. Emma had no powerful family, no royal connections, no desire for influence. She was simply someone who spent her life helping others. And somehow, that made her even more remarkable. Back in the village, Emma prepared healing supplies for the next morning. She tried to convince herself that the encounter with the Alpha King meant nothing. She told herself that powerful people eventually forgot ordinary ones. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The way Alexander looked at her was different from the way others looked at her. He had not seen a title. He had seen a person. As the days passed, Emma returned to her normal routine, hoping the distance between the village and the palace would allow the moment to disappear. But fate had already begun moving in another direction. Alexander soon received news that the kingdom needed additional healing support from skilled villagers, and Emma's name was recommended. The decision was simple. He invited her to Silvercrest Palace. When the message arrived, Emma's heart filled with uncertainty. The palace was exactly where she had always feared going. It was a place filled with powerful alphas, traditions, and expectations. A place where hiding would become almost impossible. She held the invitation carefully and wondered if accepting it would reveal the secret she had protected for so long. But somewhere inside, another feeling appeared. Maybe this was not a moment to run away. Maybe this was the first moment in years where she could discover who she truly was without fear. And far away in the palace, the Alpha King waited for the woman who had no idea that her quiet kindness had already changed the way he saw the world. The journey to Silvercrest Palace felt longer than Emma Whitmore expected. Every mile away from her village brought her closer to a world she had spent years avoiding. She sat quietly inside the royal carriage, holding a small bag of herbs in her hands, reminding herself that she was not there to seek attention. She was there because people needed her help. That was the only reason she allowed herself to enter the palace gates. But the moment she arrived, Emma felt the weight of hundreds of unfamiliar eyes watching her. The grand halls of Silvercrest were unlike anything she had ever known. Marble floors reflected the glow of golden lanterns, royal banners decorated the towering walls, and powerful figures moved through the palace with confidence. Emma lowered her gaze and tried to remember that she belonged there because of what she could offer, not because of what others thought of her. Meanwhile, Alexander Vale watched from the upper balcony as she entered the palace. He noticed the way she carried herself. She was nervous, but she did not pretend to be someone else. She did not try to gain approval from the nobles around her. She simply walked forward with quiet determination. That impressed him more than he expected. During her first meeting with the royal healers, Emma carefully explained her methods and shared knowledge she had gathered from years of helping villagers. Some members of the court seemed surprised that someone from a small village could bring such valuable experience. They had expected someone ordinary. Instead, they found someone thoughtful and capable. Alexander listened closely from his place among the royal advisors. He noticed that Emma never spoke to prove herself. She spoke because she wanted to help. After the meeting, Alexander approached her in one of the palace corridors. Emma immediately stepped aside and offered a respectful greeting. "Your Majesty," she said softly. Alexander studied her expression. He expected fear, but he saw something different. She was cautious, yet she remained sincere. "You seem uncomfortable here," he said. Emma hesitated before answering. "This place belongs to people who are used to being seen. I am used to staying unnoticed." Her honesty surprised him. Most people would have hidden their insecurity behind polite words. Emma simply admitted the truth. Alexander looked at her carefully. Why would someone who helps so many people believe they should stay invisible? Emma did not answer immediately. She looked toward the palace windows, where the kingdom stretched beyond the walls. Because sometimes people decide what you are before they ever learn who you are. Those words stayed with Alexander. He understood the meaning behind them. He had seen how quickly society judged others based on titles, families, and positions. But hearing it from Emma made him realize how deeply those judgments affected people who had no power to challenge them. Later that evening, Emma walked through the palace gardens alone. She still felt like a visitor in a world that was not built for her. She wondered how long she could remain before someone discovered the secret she had protected for so long. But across the gardens, Alexander stood watching the same stars above the kingdom. For the first time in years, The Alpha King was not thinking about politics, traditions, or responsibilities. He was thinking about one person who had spent her life hiding, not because she lacked strength, but because the world had never given her a reason to feel safe. And Alexander quietly promised himself that he would learn the story behind the Omega who had captured his attention without ever asking for it. The days that followed inside Silvercrest Palace revealed something Emma Whitmore had never expected. She had arrived believing she needed to prove that she deserved to stay, but slowly she began realizing that her actions spoke louder than any explanation she could give. Every morning, she joined the royal healers, studied old medical records, and shared the knowledge she had gathered from years of helping villagers. She never acted like someone trying to impress the court. She simply continued doing what she had always done, helping people. Yet not everyone in the palace understood her. Some nobles watched her carefully, wondering why an Omega from a small village had been given a place among the royal healers. They saw her quiet nature as uncertainty. They saw her lack of status as a weakness. Emma heard the whispers, but she refused to let them change who she was. She had spent years hiding because she feared judgment, but she was beginning to understand that hiding had never protected her heart. It had only prevented others from seeing the truth about her. Alexander Vale noticed the change before anyone else. He saw how Emma remained calm when others questioned her. He saw how she continued offering kindness, even when some people did not return it. The Alpha King had spent years surrounded by those who carefully chose every word around him. Emma was different. She did not speak to gain favor. She spoke because she believed honesty mattered. One afternoon, a group of royal advisors gathered to discuss the healing practices being introduced in the palace. Several questioned whether the methods from smaller villages could truly benefit the kingdom. Emma stood quietly as they debated, unsure whether she should defend herself. Before she could respond, Alexander spoke. A person's knowledge should not be measured by where they were born. The room became silent. Emma looked toward him, surprised. She had expected to stand alone, just as she always had. But for the first time, someone with power was not asking her to prove her worth. He was reminding others to see it. After the meeting, Emma found Alexander in the palace gardens. She thanked him for supporting her, but he shook his head. "I did not speak because you needed someone to save you," he said. "I spoke because the truth deserved to be heard." His words affected her deeply. Emma had spent so much of her life believing she had to disappear to stay safe. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone recognize her strength instead of focusing on her fears. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. Alexander looked across the gardens before answering. "Because everyone in this kingdom has a story. Too many people only look at the first page." Emma lowered her gaze, feeling emotions she had carefully hidden for years. She was not used to someone being patient with her. She was not used to someone wanting to understand instead of judge. That evening, the palace felt slightly different. The halls were still grand. The traditions were still strong. But somewhere between the royal chambers and the quiet gardens, something had changed. The Alpha King who once believed distance was necessary had begun opening his heart. And the Omega who spent years trying not to be found was beginning to wonder if being seen was not something to fear after all. The weeks that followed brought a quiet transformation inside Silvercrest Palace. Emma Whitmore still woke before sunrise, still prepared healing supplies, and still spent her days helping anyone who needed her. But something around her had changed. The people who once looked at her with doubt were beginning to notice the person behind the title of Omega. They saw her patience when others became frustrated. They saw her dedication when no one was watching. They saw that her kindness was not an attempt to gain approval. It was simply who she was. Alexander Vale noticed every moment. As the Alpha King, he had always been surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Some wanted influence. Some wanted recognition. Some wanted the protection that came with standing near the throne. But Emma wanted none of those things. She never asked for special treatment. She never used his attention as a way to rise above others. In fact, she often seemed unaware of how much respect she was earning. That was what made her impossible for him to ignore. One morning, Alexander visited the royal healing chambers while Emma was organizing supplies. He watched as she carefully checked every item, making sure nothing was wasted. "You do this every day?" he asked. Emma looked up and smiled. "There is always someone who needs help." Alexander studied her expression. There was no pride in her answer, no expectation of praise, just a simple belief that caring for others mattered. Do you ever think about what you need? He asked. Emma paused. The question surprised her because she rarely considered herself. For years, survival had been her priority. Staying unnoticed. Staying safe. Avoiding attention. I suppose I learned not to, she answered quietly. Alexander felt the weight behind those words. He realized that Emma had not hidden because she was weak. She had hidden because the world had taught her that being seen could be dangerous. That realization changed the way he viewed her completely. Later that day, Alexander invited Emma to walk through the royal gardens. Away from the busy halls, the two finally had a moment where they could speak without expectations. You know you do not have to disappear here, he said. Emma looked at him with uncertainty. People like me usually do not belong in places like this. Alexander shook his head. Maybe the problem was never that you did not belong. Maybe the problem was that people never made space for you. Those words touched something inside Emma that she had kept hidden for years. She had always believed she needed to earn a place in the world. She never imagined someone would simply tell her she already deserved one. Meanwhile, members of the royal council began noticing the growing connection between the Alpha King and the Omega Healer. Some worried about what it meant for tradition. They believed the kingdom should continue following old expectations. But Alexander had started questioning those beliefs himself. He had seen too many people judged by their titles instead of their actions. And he knew Emma represented something the kingdom desperately needed. That evening, Emma stood near the palace balcony, looking over Silvercrest Kingdom. She still wondered if she truly belonged in a world so different from her own. But for the first time, she did not feel completely alone. Somewhere nearby stood the Alpha King, who had once been a stranger. The man who saw her fear, but chose to see her strength instead. And Emma began to wonder if the place she spent her life searching for was not somewhere she had to find alone. Maybe it was somewhere she could finally be accepted. The quiet connection between Emma Whitmore and Alexander Vale continued to grow, but outside the peaceful gardens of Silvercrest Palace, uncertainty was beginning to spread. The kingdom had always followed traditions that were built over generations, and many people were uncomfortable with anything that challenged what they already believed. For some members of the royal council, Emma was still only an Omega from a small village. They had not yet learned to see the person behind the title. They only saw the difference between her and the powerful figures who had always stood near the throne. Emma noticed the change in the atmosphere. She noticed the careful conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She noticed the uncertain looks from people who were still deciding whether she belonged. The old fear returned quietly, the same fear that had followed her for years. The fear of being judged before anyone understood her. One evening, Emma found Alexander in the royal library. The room was filled with ancient books, maps of the kingdom, and records from past generations. She stood near the doorway, unsure if she should interrupt him. You look like you are thinking about leaving, Alexander said without turning around. Emma was surprised. How did you know? Alexander closed the book in his hands and looked at her. Because I have seen that expression before. You are preparing yourself to disappear before anyone can ask you to. Emma lowered her gaze. She wanted to deny it, but she knew he was right. I do not want to become a problem for you, she said quietly. The kingdom already has enough disagreements. I do not want to be the reason people question your decisions. Alexander stepped closer, his expression calm but serious. Emma, you are not a problem to solve. Those words stopped her. She had spent so much of her life believing she was something others had to accept or tolerate. She had never considered that someone could simply see her as someone valuable. Then why are people so concerned? She asked. Alexander looked toward the tall windows overlooking the kingdom. Because change is difficult for people who have never had to change before. He paused before continuing. But a leader cannot protect old beliefs just because they are familiar. Emma listened quietly. She had never expected the Alpha King to understand her fears. Yet here he was, acknowledging them instead of dismissing them. The next day, Alexander called a meeting with the royal council. He did not announce a decision based on emotion. He spoke about the kingdom's future, about recognizing talent wherever it came from, and about judging people by their actions instead of assumptions. Emma was present, but she remained silent. She did not need to defend herself. She had spent years proving her character through what she did every day. Alexander simply gave others the chance to finally see it. After the meeting, some advisors remained uncertain, but others began to reconsider their opinions. They had expected an Omega who needed protection. Instead, They discovered someone who brought knowledge, compassion, and a different perspective to the kingdom. That evening, Emma stood outside the palace gardens, watching the lights of Silvercrest shine in the distance. She thought about the girl who once believed hiding was the only way to survive. She thought about how far she had come. Nearby, Alexander watched her with quiet respect. He knew the journey ahead would not always be easy. There would still be traditions to challenge and opinions to change. But he also knew something important. Emma was no longer the Omega trying to disappear from the world. She was the person who had given the kingdom a reason to look closer. And for the first time, she was beginning to believe she did not need to hide anymore. The days following the Royal Council meeting brought a new feeling throughout Silvercrest Palace. The changes were not sudden, and not everyone accepted them immediately, but something important had begun. People were no longer looking at Emma Whitmore as only an Omega from a distant village. They were beginning to see the healer, the listener, and the person who had quietly earned respect through every action she took. Emma noticed the difference, but she remained cautious. She had spent too many years protecting herself to suddenly believe everything would become easy. She knew old beliefs did not disappear overnight. Still, there was one thing that had changed forever. She no longer felt completely alone. Alexander Vale continued to support her, not by making decisions for her, but by giving her the opportunity to make her own voice heard. That was something Emma valued more than any royal privilege. She never wanted someone to stand above her and protect her from the world. She wanted someone who believed she could stand within it. One morning, Alexander invited Emma to join him during a visit to several villages near the kingdom border. He wanted her to see the impact of the work she had started. Emma was surprised by the request. "Why would the Alpha King need me there?" she asked. Alexander smiled slightly. "Because they should hear from the person who understands them best." During the journey, Emma saw a side of the kingdom she rarely experienced. She saw farmers, families, and workers who all carried their own struggles. She listened to their concerns and offered advice with the same patience she had always shown. Alexander watched quietly as people responded to her. They did not care about her title. They cared about the way she treated them. They saw someone who listened before speaking and helped without expecting anything in return. That moment confirmed what Alexander already knew. Emma's strength had never come from status. It came from her heart. Later that evening, they stood outside beneath the open sky. The journey had been long, but the peaceful silence between them felt comfortable. "You still look surprised when people appreciate you," Alexander said. Emma looked away with a small smile. "I am not used to it." "You should be," he replied. Emma looked at him, and for a moment, she saw something beyond the crown and the title. She saw a man who truly wanted her to believe in herself. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Alexander took a moment before answering. "Because I spent years surrounded by people who wanted what I represented. You are the first person who saw me without caring about the throne." Emma felt the honesty behind his words. She understood that the Alpha King carried his own loneliness, hidden beneath his strength. They were different in many ways, but they shared something important. Both had spent years believing they had to carry everything alone. Meanwhile, back at the palace, some members of the council continued watching the changes carefully. They realized that Alexander's choices were not based on temporary feelings. He was building something different for the kingdom, something based on trust rather than fear. When Emma returned to Silvercrest Palace, she walked through the halls with a different confidence. She was still the same Omega who valued kindness above recognition. But now she understood something she had forgotten. Being seen did not always mean being judged. Sometimes, it meant finally being understood. And the Alpha King who once ruled from a distance had found the person who reminded him that a true leader did not stand above others. A true leader walked beside them. The return to Silvercrest Palace marked a turning point for Emma Whitmore. She walked through the same grand halls that once made her feel like an outsider, but this time something inside her had changed. The palace had not become smaller, and the expectations around her had not disappeared, but Emma no longer felt like she needed to hide from every uncertain glance. She had learned that belonging was not something given by a title. It was something built through courage, honesty, and the way a person chose to treat others. Alexander Vale noticed the difference immediately. He saw the confidence in her steps and the calmness in her expression. She was still the same Omega who entered the palace quietly with a small bag of herbs. But she was no longer the woman who believed she had to disappear to feel safe. One morning, Alexander invited Emma to join a gathering with leaders from different regions of Silvercrest Kingdom. He wanted them to hear directly from her about the challenges faced by smaller communities. At first, Emma hesitated. The thought of standing before so many influential people brought back memories of being judged before anyone understood her. But Alexander simply reminded her, "You are not standing there because I asked people to listen. You are standing there because your voice matters." Those words gave her the confidence to step forward. During the gathering, Emma shared stories from villages that were often forgotten by those living near the royal capital. She spoke about families who needed better access to healing resources, communities that needed support, and people who only wanted the chance to build better lives. She did not speak with anger. She did not blame anyone. She simply shared the truth with compassion. The room became quiet as people listened. Many had expected an Omega who needed protection. Instead, they saw someone who understood responsibility better than many who had spent their lives surrounded by power. Alexander watched from his place beside the throne and felt a deep sense of pride. Emma was not becoming someone important because she stood near the Alpha King. She was important because of who she had always been. After the gathering, several advisors approached her with questions. Some still had doubts, but their voices had changed. They were no longer speaking about whether she belonged. They were asking how her ideas could help the kingdom. That small difference meant everything. Later that evening, Emma walked through the palace gardens with Alexander. The same path where she once felt uncertain now felt peaceful. "I never imagined this would happen," she admitted. Alexander looked at her. "What did you imagine?" Emma smiled softly. "I thought if people ever discovered who I was, I would lose everything." Alexander stopped and looked toward the kingdom below. "And now?" Emma thought for a moment. She looked at the palace, the people, and the life she had never expected to find. "Now I think I finally found something I was never searching for." Alexander understood exactly what she meant. Neither of them had planned for this journey. Emma had only wanted to remain hidden. Alexander had only wanted to fulfill his duty as King Alpha. But somewhere between fear and trust, they had discovered something neither of them expected. A connection built not on power, but on understanding. As the stars appeared above Silvercrest, Emma realized she was no longer running from the world. She was finally standing within it. And the Alpha King who found the Omega who tried to disappear knew that her greatest strength was never something he gave her. It was something she had carried all along. The seasons changed quietly across Silvercrest Kingdom, but the greatest transformation was not found in the lands or the royal halls. It was found in the hearts of the people who lived there. Emma Whitmore stood in the palace gardens one peaceful morning, looking over the kingdom that once felt like a world she could never enter. She remembered the young woman who arrived with fear in her heart, convinced that being discovered meant losing everything. She remembered every moment she lowered her gaze, every time she chose silence because she believed it was safer. But now, she saw something different. She saw a kingdom where people were beginning to understand that a person's value was never decided by a title. Emma was still the same Omega who loved helping others. She still spent her days caring for people, listening to their concerns, and finding ways to bring comfort where it was needed. The difference was that she no longer believed her kindness had to remain hidden. Alexander Vale often watched her from a distance, not because he doubted her strength, but because he admired it. As the Alpha King, he had spent years believing that leadership meant carrying every burden alone. He thought showing uncertainty was a weakness and that distance was the price of responsibility. Emma had changed that belief without ever trying to change him. She showed him that a true leader did not need to stand above everyone else. A true leader needed to understand the people standing beside him. One evening, Alexander and Emma walked through the royal gardens beneath the soft light of the stars. The palace was quiet, and for once, neither of them needed to think about expectations or responsibilities. "Do you ever miss the life you had before?" Alexander asked. Emma smiled gently as she looked toward the distant village roads. "Sometimes I miss how simple it was, but I do not miss being afraid." Alexander understood those words more than anyone. He knew that fear had shaped both of their lives in different ways. Emma had feared being rejected because of who she was. Alexander had feared opening his heart because of the responsibilities he carried. Yet somehow, they had both discovered that trust could create a place where fear no longer controlled them. In the months that followed, Silvercrest continued to change. More people were given opportunities based on their abilities rather than their background. The old assumptions that once divided communities slowly began to fade. Emma became known not because she stood beside the Alpha King, but because she inspired others to believe they could be more than what society expected. Alexander became known not only as a powerful ruler, but as a king who listened. Together, they represented a new beginning for the kingdom. Years later, many would tell stories about the Omega who once tried to disappear and the Alpha King who saw her true worth before anyone else did. They would remember that their bond was never built on status or power. It was built on patience, respect, and the courage to see beyond appearances. Emma had spent her life hiding from a world that never took the time to understand her. But in the end, she discovered something she never expected. The place where she belonged was never somewhere she had to find. It was somewhere she was welcomed exactly as she was. And Alexander, the Alpha King who once ruled from a distance, found the person who reminded him that the greatest strength in any kingdom was not power. It was compassion.